comes in a very, very strong desire. I love the way the program works. You see, you look back, you get nervous. You look forward, you sharpen your swords. And then, desire. You see, human beings, we're so helpless in the way in which we're driven. You have no idea, how powerful the whip is and the carrot is that is in front of you that is whipping you along. And it begins with the 30th gate, and it begins with the right angle cross of contagion. When the voice described to me the change that will come at the end of this form, it talked about how the only stream out of the emotional system that will not experience the mutation of becoming aware is the stream that starts in the 41 and ends in the 35. That is, this is the stream of feelings, and this stream of feelings is the human experiential way. Logically, in that context, the human experiential way will disappear because the human form will go with it. But it's something so important to understand about the nature of this stream is that it is not capable of awareness. And it is that not capable of awareness that leads to the potential of all experience. Fools do rush in. Oh, yes, and desire makes fools out of all of us. And in the beginning was the sound, but it was a wolf's whistle. Desire really gets to you, eh? So when you come to this cross of contagion, you've got this incredible desire that says, yeah, we can kill the bear, but what about the elephant? Let's get the elephant. Oh, I'd love the elephant. It starts a whole process of saying, well, there's more. There's got to be more. Now that we're able to control the tribe in the next valley, maybe there's another valley. Maybe there's more. I don't want to eat these berries. Maybe there's more. And the desire leads to expectation. So this is the beginning of the human expectation process. Now look, without this 30th gate of desire, we wouldn't be here. Oh, it's so important. It moves us in such a profound way. Because you see, what desire does is it says, there isn't anything out there that we cannot try. Remember, it's collective. So think about the beginning of healing. If you don't have somebody who's got this stream or aspects in this stream, you're never going to figure out what works. There's two of you walking along in a field. And all of a sudden you see some mushrooms, Now the desire is unaware. It doesn't say to itself, if I eat this, I could drop dead. It's not into that. What it's into is the expectation. If I eat this, who knows? Maybe it's incredible. Maybe the taste is wonderful. Maybe I'll have a fantastic experience. Maybe I'll get really stoned. So they eat it, and they drop dead. And the one beside them says, don't eat these mushrooms anymore. This is the experiential way. Now, if we don't have the fools that rush in, we have no way of finding out which mushrooms do what. We have no way of finding out what heals and what doesn't heal. Oh, this poisons. Put that in his cup. We learn through that. You see, it's really very funny. It's the blind leading the blind. It's the dumb leading the dumber. It's really what it is. It's such a joke. Now, of course, for those of you that are not connected to any of that, you can appreciate all that. You can take the mushroom that won't kill you but will make you high. You don't care about all those dead soldiers back there. It doesn't matter. But you see, that's the way that it works. So think about desire. Desire is an incredible thing. It's the way in which the gods really laugh at us, eh? They give you a hard-on so somebody else can benefit from your death. Isn't that amazing? I love that, eh? And if you take that personal, boy, are you in trouble. Think about that. You see, the person comes in on that cross, And it doesn't matter whether that's way back then or now. This is the same person that's taking a hike with a friend that sees a mushroom or this or that and will actually just grab it and stick it in their mouth. Not thinking. They're still doing the same job. Now, I mean, today we have government labeling and, it's a little bit easier for them. And if you warn them before they go into the woods not to take anything they don't know, like children who have this cross, then they won't end up, these are the kind of children that swallow, open up the medicine cabinet and dump all these things inside. And it's so funny the way we're set off. So the desire comes in. Now think about the desire. The desire is a number of things. The desire is to make a commitment. It's to say yes to making a commitment. It's a blind yes, that 30 with the 29 opposite. Always look at arms of crosses. They tell you incredible stories. Remember, the arm of a cross, if you look at the hexagrams, they're exact mirrors of each other. They're the same thing. They're just split in the duality. The 30 says desire. The 29 says yes. Yes to desire. And what's underneath that? Trial and error. The trial and error process, you got to work your way through it. You're going to make your mistakes. Some of you will die eating that stuff. So in the story of our programming, this is essential. And remember, this is the cross of contagion. The one who dies sets off a contagious, everybody else, don't eat that, don't touch that. Works the other way too. I grew up in the 60s. Someone would have a new drug every other week. Really? And it was always these types that were trying it out. And sometimes they'd be gaga for 7 days and everybody would say, wow, they found a good one, But nobody would touch it. It's them. It's their desire that they're going to meet God on the other side. Hey, God's coming. Yeah. Okay, now here we come to a beauty. I love this cross. We come to the 30th gate, the fourth line, burnout. It's the cross of the fates. These are people that are really, that wonderful image of the spinning woman and, the fates. The 30th gate is the place of fate. And the 30th gate is the place of the sweet and the sour. It is life. The sweet and the sour of life is there. So when you come to this cross of the fates, what you're dealing with is that you're dealing with a very, very powerful definition because the design is now the 34-20 instead of the 14 and the 8. So you have the channel of charisma. This is an incarnation looking for an accident. That's what they do. They're incarnations looking for an accident, and they're busy right up until the moment that the accident comes. Busy, running on their 2034. I am busy now. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not doing it for myself, but I am very busy now. I have made my commitment and I am burning out. Now you would wonder, what do the forces want with that? It's one of the extraordinary things is that some of the most profound discoveries that we have are made by the totally and absolute obsessed. And this is the totally and absolute obsessed. Now remember, if you look statistically to look at how many variations would have such a cross, there's very, very few people that you will meet that are going to have this specific cross. After all, the 4-1 is a very small arc. It's the only one of its kind in each of these configurations, so you're not going to get a lot of population that have it. But the one thing to recognize about that is that anybody that's going to come in on this cross, they are going to be deeply, deeply, deeply obsessed, and they will take it to the extreme, whatever it is. The classic story of the scientist who has a formula that he's obsessed with, this will increase your brain power, whatever the hell it is, and he gets turned down by all of the funding, and he can't do his research, so he pumps it into his own body. He may survive or she may survive or not. But the reality is that they will take that to the extreme and burn out in doing so. However, we need them. They don't give up. They don't give up. Where so many others will give up. They will not give up. They're there. They will continue the process. And of course, what's happened to them is that they have picked up at the unconscious level through this 2034 what leads into the next grouping, which is the left angle cross of industry. Now that, by the way, is where we are right now. This is the cross of today. It's the cross we're working with. That is the energy that's programming us, is the energy of this cross of industry. Now look, you look back, you get nervous, you look forward, you join with your allies, you sharpen, up your swords, all of that. You get caught up in expectation about how all of that is going to bring you continued success, so forth and so on. And then you get down to the nitty-gritty that all of that means that you have to be busy as hell. This is one of the busiest crosses that you're going to meet. When you meet somebody who has the cross of industry, you are meeting a dynamo. They do not stop. And they're the ones that are telling everybody else, that they cannot stop either. In other words, it is the insect program at work. Everybody has to carry the load. Everybody has to work. Everybody has to be busy. And if you're not busy and you've got this kind of cross around you, are they ever going to tell you? What are you doing sitting on your butt? Now remember, they don't necessarily know that what they're doing is correct. And they rarely do anything for themselves, but they realize that if we're not busy, things are not going to progress. And that's their whole motivation in life. Everything about our ability to be able to survive is when it comes closer and closer, the deeper and deeper we become integrated with each other and we break down the barriers that separate us. This being busy together is a way in which we are brought together, but it's still being brought together through union, and through the union that's pointed at desire as the thing. In other words, I'm busy because I have an expectation that my busyness is going to lead to something. If we're all busy doing something, it should lead to something. Well, we all know that's not true. This busyness doesn't have to be productive. It just looks busy. People are, generators bumping up and down in their chairs. They may look like they're doing something. They're warming the chair. The 30th gate. The 30th gate is going to bring the deepest dilemmas to the human experience when the global themes reach there, which will be in about 700 years or so. The field of desire has to burn out. It does. The expectation field has to burn out. Now, the expectation field cannot burn out until we have concrete, verifiable patterns that we can be secure with, so that we don't have to speculate anymore. But more important than that, we have to get to a point where universally we all can shout, been there, done that. That's the goal of the experiential way. The goal of the experiential way is that somebody comes along with a whole spectrum and palette of experiences, and the 35 looks at all of that and says, done that. Don't have to get involved in all of that. Don't have to get involved in expectation. Don't have to be caught up in the desire. By the way, in understanding the presence of the 30th gate, please recognize something else as well. That this is the beginning of sexual desire as a basic theme in humanity. Now, because it's preceded by the 49, we know that the 49 is a gate of marriage and divorce. So one of the basic principles that we start with is we kill for our loved ones. You got to feed your child, you got to feed your partner, whatever the case may be. We start with that, and it's very important to see that the moment that marriage has been established, sexual desire crops up. In other words, the marriage bond is one thing, but sex is another. So we have two things that begin very early. One is that we need community, that we need to bond, and out of that will come the structure that we will eventually call marriage. But at the same time, to see that the very next step in that is, marriage is great, But you know, that one in the next village, whew, because desire comes in and says, well, wait a minute. What about that experience? I've never seen a blonde before. I mean, there's all these experiences that will open up, so the sexuality comes in a very, very strong way. When you get to the close of the left angle cross of industry and you get to the sixth line, one of the things about the mystical transformation of the sixth line, we're going through a mutation of the sixth line now, and that mutation is going to be full-fledged in 2027 when we start seeing that mutation emerge in children. One of the things to recognize about that is that the nature of industry will change. It's something very important. And this cross of industry, my pet name for this cross is the cross of slavery. Okay? These are the great slaves on the planet. Hey, let's be industrious. I'll be industrious for you. Is that okay? I'll work for you. I'll do it. I just need to be busy. Let me be industrious for you. And by the way, while I'm being industrious, you think we could make love? It's all part of that process, but I'm going to be industrious while I'm doing all of that. The nature of the industry, the nature of the business will change the moment that those who come in on the cross of industry recognize that they're not manifestors. They're manifesting generators. Remember that anytime you see a cross that has a definition, that definition has enormous impact. The 2034 is one of the most powerful forces that we have on the planet. It is the purest manifesting generator structure. It's an opposition in the wheel. It's common in society. This is a deep individual need to be active. Deep individual need. However, as we know, the difference of a manifesting generator playing the manifestor and only meeting resistance means that the industrial development of the earth, in other words, what industry could do for us, has actually been slowed down and held back to such a degree that it would boggle one's mind. We're also impressed in the last 100 years how everything suddenly, starts working faster. Well, that pace is a pace that was always possible for us. And one of the things to recognize about that pace is that as we educate manifesting generators to respond rather than to try to manifest, then the industry where they put their energy will stop being slavery and will begin to be purely productive. That's when we're really going to get the highest value out of these forces. Okay, so we move on and we come to what is certainly for us and certainly for the era that we live in, one of the most significant of all gates, the 55th gate, the gate of abundance. The reason I say this, as many of you know, it is in the 55th gate, in the sixth line of the 55th gate, that we're going to have the mutation that's going to take place in the solar plex center, that's going to begin to transform or evolve the solar plex center into an awareness, or into our third awareness, or spirit awareness. So the 55th gate is a gate that is very important. It is because of this nature and because of the fact that it is this mutative key that the right angle cross that it first establishes is a right angle cross with a very mystical name. It's called the right angle cross of the sleeping phoenix. Now remember, the nature of the phoenix is, rising up from ashes in that sense. The analogy here, if you will, is the nature of the solar plex center itself. This is the great burning machine within us, if you will. And the sleeping phoenix is this mutation that has been lying there. It's not like it just showed up. It's been there forever. It's a mutative potential that's been sitting in the 55th gate, waiting for its moment, waiting for that moment in the program, in order for it to be activated, in order for this cross to transform. And this is the only cross that I will describe to you that is actually going to be different 27 years from now. 27 years from now, the description that I will give you will not apply. In other words, that it's going to be transformed by the mutation itself. First thing to recognize about the nature of the right angle cross of the sleeping sphinx, you have the personality sun in the 55, you've got the design personality earth in the 59. So you have this opposition, this polarity, the 55-59. Remember that the 55 is the moodiest of all gates. It's the gate where the cup is half full or the cup is half empty. This is a gate where you wake up in the morning and the world is black, or you wake up in the morning and the world is light. The 59th gate is the basis of our sexual intimacy as strategy. In other words, at the moment that we come into the sleeping phoenix, one of the things to recognize is that we're going to have a transformation in the way in which our sexuality operates. Those of you that have taken gray courses with me or other courses where I talk about the transformation that's going to take place in the emotional system, that I also talk about the fact that we are going to have an enormous decrease in population in this century. That despite the statistics and the institutions worldwide that are telling us that we're reaching a point in which we're going to explode in terms of population growth, that we're about to be devastated in terms of our population. And we're certainly going to lose at least 50% of the population, the human population of the planet. Part of that is the inability to be able to reproduce. And the inability to be able to reproduce is part of the mutation that's going to take place in this cross when we get to 2027 and we have the click-in. So, and by the way, when I give dates like that and I say click in like that, please understand that we're talking about an evolutionary process. It isn't like overnight we're going to have this transition where everybody's going to see it and it's visible. It's something that's going to begin to operate, and it's going to begin to operate in newborn children, remember that. And it's something that will be fleshed out 20, 30 years later when they grow into their early maturity and the transition in them, the mutation in them begins to take hold. There are many, many forces at work to be able to diminish our capacity to be able to reproduce. There's already very, very powerful and detailed evidence about the diminished capacity for men, for example, to be able to produce sperm. We know that there's a great deal of problem in fertility in many species, and one of the most common things that you meet, for example, in the American medical landscape is the inability of couples to have children. It's almost epidemic. So one of the things to understand is that we're moving towards a point in which the capacity to be able to reproduce is something that is going to be severely limited. Okay, but let's look at the sleeping phoenix, the way it's been. In other words, the way it's been since we entered into this kind of into this round itself, into this program. What we have here is that at the design level, we've got the 34 and the 20. In other words, we still have this industriousness, this being busyness that comes with this channel of charisma. This channel that says, I know I am busy now. You know, this is their thing. Okay? So one of the things to understand about this is that what the sleeping phoenix has been up until now is that it has been industriousness, but it's been industriousness in two things. One thing is sex. In other words, finding romance, finding love, and deeply seeking love, and at the same time being deeply, suffering, because the love that one is seeking is not love that can easily be found. Remember something about the nature of individuality. It's something I always tell individuals. Collective people shudder when I say this, but it's something I always tell individuals. It's better for an individual to love what they cannot have than to have what they do not love. And of course, this is the nature of how this cross has operated. This is all about love, and it's about being busy looking for love, looking for intimacy, and suffering as a result because of food. You see, the sleeping phoenix, not doing very much, is a fat bird. You know, there's all kinds of problems that are inherent with the 55th gate when it comes to food, because this is the gate of to eat or not to eat. And based on moodiness, this is a gate that eats or does not eat. This is the cross that gives us love sickness. You know, this is the cross that gives us all of this suffering that comes out of not having love. And it's the joke, you see, because it's this cross that's going to kill sexual love. I mean, kill it. Because when a bird wakes up, it's a different movie. And the strategy is going to be altered. The strategy is going to be mutated. See, we're going to have a phenomenon in which fewer and fewer and fewer people are going to be fertile. And it's all going to come out of this transformation from this suffering, because one cannot find love, to not having to worry about it anymore. That is the sexual aspect of all of that, the reproductive aspect of all of that. Now again, that's a transition that's going to take centuries for it to fulfill itself. It's going to take a long time. But that process is coming, and it is in this cross that process is alive. If you carry that as a cross now, it's one of the things to understand is that if you're around at that time that the mutation kicks in, you're going to be highly sensitive to those young forces that are coming into the world around you. And remember, those are forces that ultimately are going to need to be guided. The cross itself is an uncomfortable cross to have, and it's only not going to be when the mutation arises. The next step in that, when you get to the juxtaposition, when you get to the fixed fate, you get to the transition of the sun-earth and you lose the busyness. The 2034 disappears, and in its place you have the design sun in the 9th gate, and you have the design earth in the 16th gate. Now, the 9th gate is about the energy for detail work, and the 16th gate is all about skills. It's all about the potential to be identified. Now, these are people that suffer from severe psychological problems. Remember that the 55th gate can be an enormously disturbing gate. And the fact is that most human beings do not understand the nature of melancholy and do not know how to deal with it. And more than that, they do not know themselves and are not living out their type. So, they're confronted with a terrible battle. Here is somebody who is deeply fixed in their moods. Now, of course, what can happen to these people is that they become fixed in depression, not simply in going through the fluctuation of melancholy, but by identifying. Remember, this is a cross of identification in which they can identify so deeply in the mood that they never get out of it. Never. Now, the business about love, well, that disappears. What's left here is a deep need to know, a deep need for depth, a deep need to find out the truth. And of course, how often do you get to find out the truth? When you meet a 4-1 with a fixed destiny and they carry this cross, you'll know, because they actually look like they're carrying one. It's heavy, and it sits heavy on their shoulders. And because they're a 4th line, they always have somebody in their life, friends, who are always trying to take this burden off their shoulder. And they can't. If you teach them what we know about individuality and melancholy, these can be extraordinary creative forces. Very, very talented human beings, the 16 being part of the channel of talent. But in the real world, no. These are people that seem very, very sad or carrying a deep weight. When you move to the transpersonal here, you get to the left angle cross of spirit. Basically, it's like this. Let me fuck you so I can feel better. Was that too crude? Well, what to do? It's good for my spirit. No, that's what it is. That's what it says. That's what it really wants. Not only that, what it would really like is a good meal as well. Let's go to a good restaurant and then let's go make love. If you know somebody who's got the left angle cross of the spirit, and if they don't have good food, and they don't have love in their lives, they're devastated. They're devastated. It's very, very important for them. Food is one of the dominant themes. And again, remember, we're still at the beginning of this first quarter of initiation. We're still dealing with very basic themes of sex and food and the needs that we must fulfill in order for us to be able to continue our process and survive. The fact is that when you're looking here at the 55th gate, because the 59th gate is sitting there at the personality earth where you do get your grounding, you have to see that the grounding is coming out of the sexual strategy. The grounding is saying, I get my spirit out of my sexual strategy. When you get to the transpersonal, you get to the 59.5, you get to the line of seduction. Let me seduce you. If I can succeed in seducing you, it's going to make my spirit feel terrific. It's good for my spirit. My spirit loves seduction. Now, of course, one of the things about the cross of the Spirit is that you're dealing with a very dynamic, individual theme of mood in that 55th gate, and that spirit can easily be down. In other words, if they don't get those things, here's where you find people that have problems with sexuality and problems with food. This cross is full of that. So here you're going to find anorexia, you're going to find bulimia, you're going to find people that are obsessed with, this is stalker mentality. You're obsessed with having to have or having to make love to somebody that you cannot have. Instead of the unrequited love that says, oh, it's great to love what I cannot have. Let me write a poem. It's terrible to love what I cannot have. I'm going to go and get it. Yeah. When you get to the 6th line, you get to the mutation. And it's so interesting to notice, because I always enjoy the jokes of evolution, is that it's never really all correct, I mean, and when I say that, it is, but it's the way it's always set up. The moment that there's a transition, the transition is automatically given to us with a built-in flaw. I mean, it's great. That built-in flaw is the open hole over the subway. Some people fall in, and by having people fall in, something gets learnt. But there's always a flaw. If you look at the 59.6 and the 55.6, where this mutation is going to take place, the sun in the 55.6, what do you have for a designed sun? The 9.3. The straw that breaks the camel's back, overlooked detail that can lead to failure. See, that's what I like about the game. The game's fair. There's no greasing. It's not like you got an easy ride to say, okay, here's the next step of evolution. Everything's terrific. Let's just go along over here. They say, excuse me. You think it's an easy ride? You think this is better than what you had? Well, maybe, but you got to deal with this and this and this. There's always something. See, I don't know what's missing in this generation that's coming into the world. I don't know. All I know is that there's something that we don't know about that's built into that. There is the overlooked detail. There is stuff that's going to be missing. It's also something else. It can very well be the straw that breaks the camel's back. You see, the most fascinating thing about the emotional mutation is that the moment that you mutate a species and you provide it with another venue for awareness, it means all the other members of that species that are limited and do not have access to that new awareness, slowly but surely they stop being members of the same species. And that creates incredible conflict. There is a straw in here. There's something at work in here that is much deeper, and that there is no way in which we can understand how that is really going to unfold. It is, after all, out of the root of the sleeping phoenix itself. We don't know what's going to emerge out of that. When we complete that mutation, the next step in that, when you're moving through in the wheel, we were up here at the 55th gate. And when you're up here at the 55th gate, the next step as you're moving, the next step is the 37th gate, and the 37th gate is the gate of the family. Now we know that the moment that the sun is going to be in the 37th gate, we're going to have the earth in the opposite in the 40th gate, and we're going to have the definition, the 4037. We're going to have the channel of community. Now the channel of community specifically is about the bargain. And it's one of the things to recognize is that the bargain of the family is what flows naturally out of the previous structure. In other words, we saw that the cross of the sleeping phoenix is all about the establishment of the sexual bonds and the fulfillment of sexual strategies in order to alleviate the spirit. To find love in that sense through sexual bonding. And that love through sexual bonding then has to be formed completely in the bargain of the family. Now look, the bargain of the family is going to change. Oh, is it going to change? What is a family going to look like? When we have such limited fertility. We can't imagine that. We don't know what that's like. It has never been natural to our species. Now, if we don't pay attention to the mutative aspect that's coming, if we just look at what's sitting there, what we see is that natural flow out of that need for sexuality and love and the fulfillment of the spirit, that the program says, get that out of the family. In other words, by entering into the bargain of family, that's the only way in which that aspect ultimately can be fulfilled. That the sexual strategy was there in order to be able to produce children, community, because community is the strength upon which human beings succeed. So when we come into the 37th gate, we come to the right angle cross of planning. In the synthesis of the human design system, in using the zodiacal wheel, we not only use the Babylonian-rooted Western astrology, but we also use Eastern astrology. Those of you that have taken the Global Cycles course with me know that by using the precession of the equinox, we can see larger global themes as they impact on us. Right now, the global theme that impacts on us is this right angle cross of planning. And this right angle cross of planning, when we are through with that, we are now in the first line theme because it moves the other way. It's moving clockwise. The global themes move clockwise. And so what that means is that we are now in the 37-1, and in 2027, the global theme moves to the 55-6. That's the transition point. Here we're looking at it the other way around. In other words, the world that we live in, the way in which the earth and its consciousness operates, what we're looking at here is its genetic code strung out. All of these themes I'm giving you at the end of this process, when we put all of these themes together, we have the genetic code of the totality. In other words, we have the parameter and the structure and the pattern of which consciousness operates on this planet. So when you're looking here at the cross of planning, that's where we are right now. And the cross of planning is about community and the bargain. Now, by the way, this cross became active in 1610. So think about that. Since 1610, the global theme has been the cross of planning. That cross of planning is about energy for detail. It is about the capacity for skills and the search for depth. And it's about building community. Now remember, those of you, for example, who have taken the mystical course know that the 4037, in building its community, also structures the religious practices. It's building the churches, it's building the temples. It's forming the bond that holds the community together. Since that beginning of the 17th century, we have had the byproduct and the value of this larger program theme. In other words, we have had the institutionalization of life. We get institutionalized health and the inner structures of cities and, school systems and all of these things and companies and organizations and on and on and on and on. All of this is part of the cross of planning. People who come in on this cross, I've done the readings of about 800 sannyasins, and I know about 300 who came in on the cross of planning. It's one of the most common right angle crosses for the sannyasins that I have dealt with in my process. In other words, you can see out of that where the force is in all of that, to bond together, and to bond together in an attempt to create something greater, to organize something at a greater level. It's something that has a tremendous amount of skill within it as a potential. This cross of planning is coming to an end. In other words, what we're looking at is that the kind of civilization that we have been living in is reaching its point of fulfillment now. By the time we get to 2027, we should have all of the basic information we need to understand certain fundamentals about the universe and about our own bodies. The nature of the genetic code, the ability to be able to understand the nature of mass in the universe, the age of the universe, certain basic things. We're here to understand what we are. This is the revelation of human design. That's what it's here for. To give everybody an opportunity to recognize clearly what their nature is so that they can let go and simply be in the flow of what life is. This cross of planning, this vast organizing and integrating, it's all going to disappear. You see, when you go into the next global cycle in 2027, you go into a global cycle that's almost entirely individual. It doesn't care about the tribe. It doesn't care about the bargain. You see, the bargain is going to break down. It's just going to break down. Because the family, in the sense of which we know it, is going to break down. The fixed aspect of the sun in the 37th gate is that when you get to the fourth line and you get to the juxtaposition cross of bargains, what you get to is the fixed bargaining being. Everything is the bargain. Everything. And they are fixed on that. You know, it doesn't matter what goes on in their life. It really doesn't matter. Everything is about the deal. And one of the things to understand about the 4-1, if you have a 4-1 in your life, a juxtaposed cross in your life, it does no good to resist them. You can never, ever, ever, ever change them. You can't. But you can destroy them. There's nothing you can do. It is their fixed fate. And so it's very important to understand that when you meet somebody like a juxtaposition cross of bargains, and everything's a deal. I mean, everything's a deal. They'll drive you crazy. Everything's a deal. You know, you have a cigarette? Yeah, for what? You know, everything's a deal. You can't do anything about it, eh? See, the beautiful thing about incarnation is that you get to see that jerks are incarnated on purpose. Fools are incarnated on purpose. Assholes are incarnated on purpose. It's just the way it is, and it's okay. And if you meet one of these people and they bargain you to death, what to do? Understand the joke in all of that, eh? The way in which society is organized through the cross of planning, you get to see its extremism in the bargain, because that's what it is. We all have got these tacit bargains. You know, we've built our civilization on these bargains. You know, we've been able to expand at this incredible pace through these bargains. When you get to the left angle, when the sun moves into the fifth line, you always come back to the same problem. You know, nothing harder than trying to be nice to another human being. Because they tend to be just awful, you know? Well, it's true. I mean, when you think about how many people you know in your life and how many people that you've met in your life, how many do you actually want to talk to? It's true. But it's built into us. I love the 37.5. This is the gate of love. Everybody sees that and goes, ah. You know, but the detriment is love turned to hate. And this is the left angle cross of migration. I don't want to be in this neighborhood anymore. You know, I can't stand these people. I'm moving over there. And you see, this is the way planning moves. I mean, think about that. Eh? You got all these people and they're busy planning things, and then, you know, it's all done. And then what do? You have to live with the people. While you were building the community, everything was great. You're all busy building the community together, everything's fine. When the community is finished and you got to be neighbors, that's another story. This is what you get in religious movements. You know, schisms. You know, they all build the same house together, everybody's happy. And then they have to live together. Building the house kept them together. That's the planning. That's great. Then they live together and say, I can't stand you, you're rotten, I don't want to listen to you anymore. We're moving over here, we'll build another one over here. America was founded by this cross. I mean, it was. The Puritans, it's just, religious fanatics. So we're migrating. We don't want to be here with you anymore because we don't like you, because emotional dependency turns love into hate. That's the 37-5. So you see, that's when the bargain breaks down. The bargain breaks down at a projection, and the bargain's intended to break down. There's this wonderful scene in the movie The Matrix, which my son has seen 200 times, so I've seen it at least 3 or 4 times myself. There's this wonderful scene where one of these computer machine guys is talking to this human and interrogating him and telling him, how terribly disgusting he is. And he's describing what humans do. He says, well, you know what they do. They take over one place, and then when they're finished with that, they move on, and they tear up everything, and blah, 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 blah. And eventually he goes on to say that, humans are awful, and they're viruses, and blah, blah, blah. Here's the virus. You see, we were never content to sit in our own valley, because the moment we sat in our own valley, there's going to be somebody in the valley who doesn't want to be there and doesn't want to leave alone. Muck rakes around and gets everybody else to understand it and drags them off to start a new branch. Ants do that all the time. We make a drama out of it. The ant just gets up and goes and says, okay, new colony. We become enemies with the one that was over there, the one that you left behind. You hate them now. And think about the transition that's going to take place in all of that when the 55 changes. See, when the emotional system wakes up, the amount of changes that are going to take place in the way in which our consciousness and awareness works, it's extraordinary. I mean, after all, the way we've made bargains, the way we've made love, the way we've fallen in love has all been based on an emotional motor that carries no truth in the now. I mean, it's been chaotic, and it's been chaotic for just about forever. And we're coming to a point in which that chaos is going to still itself. That will change so many things in the way in which the bargain is actually established. In the movement of the wheel, the 37 then moves to the 63. This is the first time that we actually get to a gate of mind. And in that moment of getting to a gate of mind, here's the sun going into the 63rd gate. This is the right angle cross of consciousness. The personality sun in 63, the personality earth in 64, 2 head center gates, the collective gates of the head center, the pressure, and then the design sun in 5, and the design earth in 35. First of all, the 63rd gate is the great gate of doubt, and it's the great gate of suspicion. In order for society to survive, it must have reliable patterns that it can work with, know, and feel secure with. And without those reliable patterns, civilization and society, they break down. So one of the things to recognize about the 63rd gate is that the 63rd gate is the gate of asking questions. And its questions are based on uncertainty and suspicion about patterns. So one of the things that's clear is that by the time you get to this point where you have this kind of cross incarnating, you have something new that's coming in. In other words, the beginning of being able to codify the patterns. This is the link that it has with the 5th gate. The 5th gate is the gate of patterns. It's at the root of our cellular process. It establishes whether it's a cellular pattern or whether it's a life pattern. And at the same time, you have the 35th gate, which is the completion of the desire process and whether or not expectation has been fulfilled. In this cross, along with the 64, the gate of confusion that's always looking at the past, that what you have here is the beginning of the stimulation of the mental process. In other words, the attempt of mind to begin to claim authority. You see, in the beginning, mind claims authority. It simply does. See, the moment that you step into a Maya that's constructed by mind, that only at a point where you're deep in your education are you ever going to be able to see that mind has no authority. For the vast history of humanity, mind has been the only thing that ever had any kind of authority. So this is the beginning of the mental plane being the place in which everybody is then looking to see if things are working. It's not about the physical, sexual stuff anymore. It's not about the basic food. We already have these basic things there in the program. But this is saying, look, we've got to go above this. There's something else to explore. Why are we here? What are we here for? This is what the right angle cross of consciousness brings. These are question askers. Now we will see that as a right angle cross, because it has 4 variations, you're going to see it's very different when we move from this quarter of initiation, where the sun's in the 63rd gate, so the focus is on the question, and when the sun moves into the other gates. In other words, those themes will change dependent on that positioning. But here in this first variation, very important to recognize that this is the beginning of trying to organize the world mentally. Now, it isn't about awareness. It's about pressure. You see, we're under enormous pressure to mentally work things out. We're under enormous pressure to mentally work things out. You know, you can take all the babas and all the gurus who tell you no mind, and it's all very nice. But you know, there's no mind until you figure out what mind is, and you deal with it, and you answer those things that must be answered within you. If you don't get the answer inside of you, you know. If there's any major question within you that you've never articulated, you know, because there's a part of you that just isn't correct here, now. It's always there. See, that's what consciousness is all about. There's this incredible pressure that says, why? 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 When you get to the juxtaposition, you get to the juxtaposition cross of doubts. Again, these are people that are fixed. They used to, you know, there was these great comedy routines where, you know, the kind of person that's always whining. You know this? This is the cross of whining. You know, it has this kind of, you know, this is always, no, it won't work. No, it can't work. No, I won't be able to do it. No, they can't do it. No, I don't think it really will. And you know you can't stop them. This is the kind of person that you go to school with, and as you're entering into the room to take the exam, they say to you, oh, I'm going to fail. Oh, it's terrible. I'm really not prepared. Nothing's going to work. They get 100, and you say to them, what was all that about? You got 100. I don't know how that happened. I really wasn't prepared. and I'm worried about the next one already, you know? They always have their doubts. But of course, at that, you know, that can be quite amusing in that way. But of course, they have their doubts about everybody else. They have their doubts about their life. They have their doubts about God. They have their doubts about everything. If you want to look for, you know, atheism, you can find the roots of atheism in this juxtaposition. You know, this deep doubt. I mean, you know, God, well, I don't know, you know. I like the next cross. It's one of those things that amuse me, but then again, I have a black sense of humor. You have the personality and Sun Earth in the 63 and the 64, so you still have this pressure at the mental plane. But what's accompanying it is the design Sun in the 26, the design Earth in the 45. Now, this is called the left angle cross of dominion. And the left angle cross of dominion is very interesting, because the left angle cross of dominion is about the usurpation of power. This is about taking power. See, one of the things that mind gives you is a chance to take power. And this is what it's all about. In other words, you may have a big dick or beautiful breasts or whatever the case may be, but if you really want to succeed, you better have something in your noodle. You know? Because that's really going to make a difference between you and them. So you go through all this first programming that says you got to have all the physical equipment to do the job, and then all of a sudden they get into the mental stuff and they say, excuse me, it's not enough. You know? It's just not enough. So usurpation is something that takes place out of the mental capacity, out of consciousness to be conscious. In other words, if you're conscious of somebody else and they have a flaw, you can take advantage of it. Now, of course, there's people who say, oh, gee, that's not nice. You know, it's very polite. Yes, well. Yeah, sure, it's nice. I mean, in some situations, usurpation is the only way. And after all, it's transpersonal. In other words, they can't usurp alone. And usually the one they take power from has been waiting for aeons for them to come back and finally do it. Because it is transpersonal and it is karmic. But think about how that operates. What that's really saying to us is that at the moment that we think we've got a bargain in community that might bring us some decent sex and some children, what we get out of that is that somebody might want to take it all away from us just because they're smarter than we are. Would you like to buy the Brooklyn Bridge? You know, give me your life savings. Every once in a while on television, I'm astonished. I mean, always, you know, it's always a cliche. The little old lady in Omaha, you know, who gives $85,000 to buy lottery tickets. I mean, I don't even know where she got the 85 grand, let alone that she gave, you know, that over the telephone to somebody that she never met. I mean, human beings get their heads cut off all the time. There's always somebody ready to take power from you. Always. And you see, that's a Darwinian reality. It is survival of the fittest out here. You know, this is a dog-eat-dog world, all that stuff. It's built in. So somebody comes along with this kind of configuration. The one thing you know about them is that, you know, you invite them in to be your partner, you can end up being their slave. Just the way that it works. Now, often they're really good at that. In other words, you know, that might end up being an improvement. It also may not, eh? The left angle cross of dominion. How sweet. Okay, and look what it leads into. When the sun shifts, you know, the sun's going to move out of the 63, so you're going to lose this pressure that's mental, and you're going to come into the 2247, and you're going to come into a different kind of structure. The sun in the 22, the gate of grace. Again, we're back in the individual process. Remember that the gate of grace is a gate of attentiveness. This is a place where the individual is ready to listen, that this is a potential for mutation. It's also an openness to art, to music, very important for breathing, many other things. When you come to this right angle, you get the right angle cross of rulership. You notice that usurpation comes before rulership. Now they're different. You see, the usurper has no right. I mean, after all, you know, the usurper has no right. They're just grabbing, and they're designed to make the grab. Here, when you come to the right angle cross of rulership, this comes in with grace. These are natural rulers. They'll end up in their life being offered rulership rather than being usurpers who have to claim that rulership. And remember that the usurper is a left angle that's transpersonal, and the ruler isn't. The ruler's a right angle. You know, and if you make bad rules, you pay for the karma later. Remember that the right angle is making that, creating what they're going to deal with in the future. One of the interesting things here is that the way in which this cross operates is that in the very first variation, that is the foundation cross of introspection, where you have the earth and the 47-1, remember that the 47th gate is a very difficult gate. It's a gate of oppression. It's all about trying to deal with the pressure from the past and trying to resolve that, trying to find some clarity, make some sense out of the past. And the first line is ambition. It's all about being busy. And this is where the cliche about, busy fingers and, you don't have to worry about your mind anymore. And it's one of those things that's very interesting about this cross is that if they're busy with ruling, they're very grounded and very healthy people. But, they come into the world to rule. Think about how that works out. Just as a sidebar, you have a baby come into your life, and the baby comes in with the cross of rulership. They're going to rule your life. They're just going to rule your life. There's anything you're going to do about it. Now, you're going to be able to describe it in many ways. You don't have to describe it as rulership, but, they're going to rule your life. These people come into the world and they're here to rule. Now, the one thing about them that's very important is that they will listen. That's their greatest gift as rulers. Remember the nature of the 45th gate. This is where all of this rulership is stemming from. The 45th gate is the gate of the Pasha, the king, the queen. This is the natural ruler of the tribe, and this is the natural controller of territory. If you have somebody who has a 45th gate in their profile, you always have somebody in their life who's going to be offered territory. In other words, they're going to be offered a form of rulership. But one of the most important things about rulership is that the 45th gate has an obligation to educate. Remember a few steps back when we were dealing with the program saying, well, look, we have to be conscious, we have to see the value of the mind. One of the things to understand about rulership is that the best rulers are the ones who educate their people the best. This is something that is just so obvious, and it's something that's very, very important to understand. In other words, by the time you get over thinking that only the physical body is going to supply you with your needs, you kill the next or whatever the case may be, you have to get to a point where there is another way. That other way is that you go beyond the physical, that you get into the educational, that you begin to educate. And it's the greatest responsibility of rulership to be a good educator. So one of the things about this particular configuration of rulership with the 22 there, and remember it'll be different in its other three variations that we'll meet, with the 22 there, they listen. And because they listen, they have a tendency to be more open to doing the work necessary to educate those that they are ruling. If you rule without educating, ultimately you're going to meet destruction. Ultimately, you're going to have rebellion and revolution because it cannot be avoided. It's one of the main, things of the nature of what a true ruler is that their greatest responsibility is to educate those that they rule. This is a funny transition because when you go here to the juxtaposition cross, which is the juxtaposition cross of grace, what happens is that the 2645 disappears, so the whole rulership business is gone. The usurpation that was in the left angle cross before, the rulership that's here in the right angle, that rulership quality that was there in the 45 has disappeared. So we have a very different kind of configuration. The juxtaposition cross of grace, remember we had a fixed cross of listening. Remember that cross of listening. These were people that listened. They had a hard time being able to explain themselves. This is a cross of deep, deep attentiveness. But more than that, this is a cross of falling in love. These are people that are stuck on falling in love. And what I mean by that is that it doesn't have to be, a partner. Falling in love with anything. Just to be able to listen to it. So you love Pavarotti. So you hear Pavarotti 12 hours a day. You just take it in. And 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 it doesn't matter. You just take it in. So it's one of the things about these beings is that they get totally absorbed by other forces. In that, by the way, they become very powerful mutative agents. Carrying that sun in the 22nd gate and having the earth, the design earth, in the 12th gate. What you have here is a definition of the channel 1222. These beings are deeply social. They have a deep capacity to meet strangers and to take them in. If you ever wanted to do a survey of the common man, woman in society, You send out the juxtaposition cross of grace. Everybody will tell them everything, and they will listen in total enthrallment to what's being given to them. They have an enormous social capacity. Now, they're very fixed, obviously. They're fixed on taking in. Now, one of the things to understand about the presence of the 12th gate is that the 12th gate is a gate of articulation. And by the time you get to the left angle, to the transpersonal, you don't have the limitation of a fixed geometry. You have a transpersonal geometry, and this gift of being attentive, connected with the 12th gate, becomes the possibility to deeply inform others. This is the left angle cross of informing. And these are the world's great gossips. This is the cross of gossip. They came in on the cross of gossip. Now, when I say that, by the way, there is no negative connotation to gossip. I've been gossiped about forever. Some of it is good, some of it is bad. What to do? It's gossip. They're informers. And if we don't have these informers, and by the way, when I say it like that, you can understand another connotation, eh? Yeah. Ah, yes. They are those too, eh? They are informers. They let you know. Not only that, but they're freaks. They're freaks. And their emotional system is connected to the throat. And guess what? They inform you whether you like it or not. Whether you're ready or not. Being emotional manifestors. The moment that they could live out their design, the moment that they could wait out their wave and recognize that there is no truth in the now for them and they cannot afford to just jump, then you'd have a totally different way in which this cross of informing works. What it tends to be is the cross of blurting. They blurt things out. And they blurt things out at the wrong moment. And it all comes out of their attentiveness. It really does. They hear something and then they blurt something out. And of course, what they blurt out can create all kinds of problems. The personality Earth's in the 47th gate, so you got all this kind of oppression that's working underneath all of that. Trying to make sense out of things and blurting them out. So if you have a child that has the cross of informing and you have an amphetamine habit, you got a problem. Miss Jones! Okay. We move from the 22nd gate, we move to the 36th.